As I stepped into the courtroom, my mother sighed in disgust, and my father kept his eyes on the floor. Then the judge suddenly stopped, leaned closer and whispered, "Wait, is that her?" The room went dead quiet. They finally realized who I was. They called me worthless, a failure, a stain they couldn't bear to acknowledge. But what they really couldn't stand was the truth I was about to expose. A truth that would shatter their carefully constructed lives, and reveal the monstrous secret they'd buried for 12 long years. The venom in my mother's whisper cut deeper than any shout. "Don't embarrass us, Anna. Just stay quiet and let the real lawyers handle this." We were walking through the grand doors of the courthouse, and her words were meant to shrink me, to remind me of my place. But I didn't even flinch. I just kept walking, my heels clicking against that polished marble floor. Each sharp sound was a testament to a confidence I'd spent years, decades, even painstakingly building. My father, he wouldn't even glance my way. His eyes were fixed on some distant, invisible point, as if I were a smudge on the pristine landscape of his perfect life, a mistake too inconvenient to acknowledge. Honestly, that was nothing new. "Hi, I'm Anna. I'm 31, and for most of my life, I've been the Thompson family's designated disappointment. The dropout, the failure, the inconvenient daughter they conveniently forgot about when relatives asked after their children. We were here in a courthouse in Omaha, Nebraska, because my parents were trying to evict their tenant. Her name was Claire, and her crime was having the sheer audacity to ask for basic repairs before paying rent on an apartment that was quite literally falling apart around her. My parents, bless their hearts, owned 3 rental properties, all inherited from my grandfather. And trust me, they ran them less like businesses and more like feudal lordships, squeezing every last penny from their tenants, completely oblivious to the human beings living inside. Claire had been in one of their apartments for 2 years, always paid on time, a model tenant, until, that is, the ceiling started leaking. Then came the black mold, creeping insidiously into her daughter's bedroom. She'd withheld rent, desperate for them to fix it. Their response? Immediate eviction papers. "She signed a contract, Anna," my mother had shrieked at Melissa over the phone just 2 weeks prior, a conversation I happened to overhear. "She doesn't get to just stop paying because she's picky about a little moisture." A little moisture. That's what she called toxic black mold growing in a child's bedroom. It made my blood run cold. I'd only learned about Claire's predicament through my younger sister, Melissa. She's 28 and still lives at home, stuck in their orbit. She'd casually mentioned it during one of our rare, carefully guarded phone calls, completely unaware of the monumental secret I'd been keeping. She had no idea that I'd spent the last 7 years of my life clawing my way through law school, working 3 soul-crushing jobs to pay my way, sleeping in my beat-up car more times than I could possibly count, all leading up to one singular impossible goal, passing the bar exam. And I did it. I did it all alone. Not a single dollar. Not one solitary word of encouragement ever came from them. They didn't even know I'd gone to college, let alone that I was now a practicing attorney. The memory still burned. The day I walked out of their house at 19, my father had followed me, grabbing my meager belongings and scattering them across the front lawn. "You're nothing," he'd roared, his face contorted with rage. "You'll never amount to anything without us." My mother, arms crossed, stood framed in the doorway, a grim sentinel. "Don't come crawling back when you fail, Anna." But I hadn't. Not once. Even when I was sleeping in that cold car behind a grocery store, my meals consisting of stale vending machine snacks, I didn't go back. Even when I was so utterly exhausted from overnight shifts that my eyelids felt like lead weights in class, I never asked for their help. I would have rather starve than swallow my pride and beg from the very people who had, so definitively, declared me worthless. And here we were, all these years later. As we approached the courtroom, I watched my mother, perfectly coiffed, smoothing down her expensive blouse, adjusting the pearls around her neck. Appearances, you see, were always her greatest concern, her shield against the world. My father, in his tailored suit, walked beside her, the very picture of respectable, affluent disdain. They were a vision, a pristine facade. At their country club, they'd long since told everyone they had only one daughter, Melissa, the obedient one, the receptionist at their dentist's office, the one who still let them dictate every single aspect of her life. "I don't know why you even came," my mother muttered, her voice barely audible, as we reached the heavy courtroom doors. "This doesn't concern you." I just smiled, a small, knowing curve of my lips, and said nothing. I let them think I was just there to watch. Let them think I was still that broken, discarded girl they'd so carelessly thrown away. Oh, how wrong they were. Inside the courtroom, the air felt thick, heavy with unspoken dread. Claire sat alone at the defendant's table, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. She was a small woman in her 40s, her dress showing years of wear. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhaustion etched into every delicate line of her face. This wasn't just about a lease or an apartment for her. This was about the very roof over her daughter's head. Everything. My parents, meanwhile, took their seats on the plaintiff's side, radiating smug entitlement. My mother actually gestured for me to sit in the gallery behind them, as if I were some curious bystander. I walked right past her, didn't even acknowledge the command, headed straight for Claire's table. Oh, I could feel my mother's eyes burning into my back, practically hear the frantic gears of her mind grinding, trying to process what in God's name I was doing. Excuse me, I said quietly to Claire, my voice barely a whisper yet firm. I'm your attorney. Her eyes, wide with disbelief and hope, darted up at me. My attorney? But I couldn't afford an attorney. I was going to represent myself. Consider this pro bono, I told her, setting my briefcase down with a satisfying thud. I've reviewed your case, and you have every right to withhold rent until those repairs are made. Your landlords, and I emphasize that word, have violated the implied warranty of habitability. Behind me a sharp choked gasp. My mother. Then my father's voice, low and absolutely seething, cut through the sudden silence. What the hell do you think you're doing? I turned slowly, and for the first time in 12 years I looked my parents directly in the eye. All the rage, the hurt, the years of silent defiance, it was all there in that one stare. I'm doing my job, I stated simply. My mother's face cycled through a spectrum of emotions. Pale shock, then scarlet fury. You can't be serious. You're not a lawyer. Actually, I am. I pulled out my neatly laminated bar card, held it up for them to see. I passed the bar exam 2 years ago. I've been working at a firm downtown, mostly handling tenant rights cases. This, believe it or not, is exactly my area of expertise. My father stood up, his hands clenched into fists, shaking with impotent fury. This is ridiculous. You dropped out of community college. You're a homeless bum we threw out for being a waste of space. I was homeless for a while, yes? I replied, my voice disturbingly calm, cutting through his bluster. Thanks to you. But I worked my way through school. I graduated from college, then law school. And I did it all without a single cent from either of you. Before my father could explode further, the judge swept in. Everyone scrambled to their seats. Judge Patricia Holbrook, a woman in her 60s with steely gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that could make even seasoned attorneys sweat, took her place. Her eyes scanned the room, then landed on me, and I saw a flicker of recognition. My heart gave a tiny leap. Counsel, please approach, she commanded. I walked to the bench, joined by my parents' high-priced attorney, Gerald, a man who I knew billed $500 an hour. Judge Holbrook looked from him to me, then down at her papers. I see we have representation for the defendant now, she said, a hint of curiosity in her voice. Counselor Anna Thompson, Your Honor, I replied, my voice steady. I'm representing Claire Mitchell in this matter. Judge Holbrook's eyebrows rose just slightly. Anna Thompson? I thought that name sounded familiar. Didn't you argue the Riverside Apartments case last year? Yes, Your Honor. You won that case if I recall. The tenants got everything they asked for. Repairs, rent reimbursement, and damages. That's correct, Your Honor. She looked briefly at my parents, whose faces were now a magnificent tableau of horror and dawning dread, then back at me. And in her expression something shifted. A knowing glint. This should be interesting. Let's proceed. As I walked back to Claire's table, I stole a glance at my parents. My mother's face was pure unadulterated horror, laced with disbelief. My father looked like he'd just been physically slapped. Melissa, sitting behind them, had her hand clapped over her mouth, her eyes wide as saucers. It was all happening. I sat down next to Claire, who was staring at me as if I just performed a miracle. Thank you, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you. Just tell the truth when you're asked questions, I said, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. That's all you need to do. Gerald, my parents' fancy lawyer, stood first. He smoothly spun a tale of Claire being a difficult tenant, a malcontent looking for any excuse to avoid paying rent. He painted her as someone who blew minor maintenance issues completely out of proportion. He even flashed pictures of the apartment from years ago, when it was first rented pristine, spotless. The plaintiffs have always maintained their properties to the highest standards. He droned, slick as ever. They're responsible landlords who simply want what they're owed, the rent that was agreed upon in a legally binding contract. It was all such a carefully crafted lie. Then it was my turn. I stood up, walked to the evidence table, the confidence from my clicking heels now emanating from my every step. I'd spent the last 2 weeks doing nothing but digging, relentlessly gathering every single piece of proof. I laid it out one by damning one. Photos of the actual leaking ceiling, the horrific black mold, the broken windows that wouldn't even close. Then came the medical records. Stark evidence that Claire's young daughter had developed severe respiratory problems directly from living in that apartment. The maintenance requests, ignored for months. And finally, the undeniable hammer blow. A city inspector's report that condemned entire sections of the building as uninhabitable. Your Honor, I said, my voice cutting through the remaining tension. The defendant didn't withhold rent out of spite or convenience. She withheld it because the apartment she was paying for had become a health hazard. A dangerous, unlivable space. Nebraska law is abundantly clear. Landlords must maintain properties in a condition fit for human habitation. When they fail to do so, tenants have the legal right to withhold rent until repairs are made. I walked the judge methodically through every single violation, every ignored request, every broken promise. My parents had been greedily collecting rent for months, knowing full well that building was quite literally crumbling around Claire and her child. They'd threatened her when she dared to complain, told her with cruel indifference, "If you don't like it, you can leave," all while knowing she was trapped, unable to afford breaking her lease and moving somewhere else. "This isn't about a difficult tenant, Your Honor," I concluded, my voice rising with righteous indignation. "This is about landlords who saw their tenants as nothing more than a revenue stream, who cared infinitely more about collecting money than ensuring the basic safety and well-being of the people living in their buildings." Judge Holbrook listened, utterly rapt, making meticulous notes, asking pointed, incisive questions. When I held up the medical records detailing Claire's daughter's respiratory ailments, I watched her jaw tighten. She turned to Gerald, her voice clipped. "Counselor, did your clients know about the mold?" Gerald stammered, shuffling his papers nervously. "They were aware of some moisture issues, Your Honor." "Did they know about the mold?" she repeated, her voice colder now. "Yes, Your Honor, but they dispute that it was as severe as the tenant claims. The city inspector's report says otherwise," Judge Holbrook stated flatly. She then fixed her gaze on my parents, her expression one of barely concealed disgust. "In fact, it says the entire unit should have been vacated months ago." My mother, ever the dramatics, started to open her mouth, but my father, his face ashen, clamped a hand on her arm, silencing her. Judge Holbrook turned back to me. "Continue, Counselor." I laid out the rest of my evidence, building the case brick by damning brick. By the time I finished, there wasn't a soul in that courtroom who didn't believe my parents had been, at best, grossly negligent landlords, and at worst, criminally so. They had risked a child's health, a child's life, for the paltry sum of $1,200 a month. "Your Honor," I said in my closing statement, "my client isn't asking for much. She's asking for what she's legally entitled to. A safe place to live. She's asking for repairs to be made, for the horrific conditions that forced her to withhold rent to be remedied. And she's asking for reimbursement for the medical expenses her daughter incurred, as a direct result of living in an unsafe environment." I sat down and Claire reached across, squeezing my hand. Her eyes were brimming with tears, but they weren't tears of despair anymore. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. Judge Holbrook looked at my parents for what felt like an eternity. "I'll be honest with you," she said, her voice grave. "I've seen a lot of landlord-tenant disputes in my years on the bench, but this is one of the more egregious cases I've encountered." My mother's face had gone from fiery red to bone white. My father looked like he wanted the floor to simply swallow him whole. "I'm ruling in favor of the defendant," Judge Holbrook declared, her voice ringing with authority. "Not only will the eviction be dismissed, but the plaintiffs will be required to make all necessary repairs within 30 days. Additionally, they will reimburse the defendant for 3 months of rent and all medical expenses related to her daughter's respiratory issues. And just so we're crystal clear," she added, a steely gaze fixed on my parents, "if these repairs aren't completed to code within the specified time frame, I will personally refer this case to the city for further action." She brought her gavel down with a sharp, resounding thwack. It was over. Claire broke down, sobbing openly, thanking me over and over. I helped her gather her things, walking her out of the courtroom, feeling her cling to my arm like I was her lifeline. Behind us, I could hear my parents, voices hushed but absolutely furious, tearing into Gerald. Outside, Claire hugged me tight, tears still streaming. "You saved us," she choked out. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't have to," I said, gently pulling away. "Just take care of your daughter." She left, still trembling, and I stood there for a moment, letting the monumental weight of it all settle over me. 12 years. 12 excruciating years of being told I was worthless, of being treated like I simply didn't exist. 12 years of fighting, clawing, proving every single day that I was more than the failure they'd so gleefully labeled me. And now, in one afternoon, I'd proven them wrong. In the most public, undeniable way possible. I was gathering my things, the victory still buzzing in my veins, when I heard footsteps. I turned. My mother stood there, her face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. "How dare you?" she spat, her voice a ragged hiss. "How dare you humiliate us like that?" "I did my job," I said calmly, my voice steady. "Your job?" she practically screamed. "You call destroying your own family your job?" "You're not my family," I said. The words came out flat, emotionless, and undeniable truth. "You stopped being my family the day you threw me out with absolutely nothing." My father appeared beside her, his face a terrifying shade of purple with anger. "You ungrateful little. I'm not the one who should be ashamed here." I cut him off, my voice gaining strength. "You put a child's health at risk because you were too cheap to fix a leaking roof. You're lucky Judge Holbrook didn't refer you for criminal charges. We raised you," my mother wailed, her voice cracking. "We gave you everything." I laughed then, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed sharply in the empty hallway. "You gave me nothing. Everything I have, everything I am, I earned on my own. And you know what? I'm glad you threw me out. because it taught me exactly who you are. People who care more about money and appearances than about doing what's right. I walked past them then, my head held high, leaving them frozen there in their expensive clothes, their pride utterly shattered. But even as I walked away I knew, this wasn't over. Not for a second, because my mother never, ever let anything go. And neither did my father. I drove back to my office in a haze, the entire scene from the courtroom replaying in a loop in my mind. Judge Holbrook's flicker of recognition, the sheer horror in my parents' eyes, Claire's heartfelt gratitude. It all felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold on a screen. My firm, Kestrel & Associates, was housed in a beautifully renovated warehouse downtown. It wasn't fancy. Exposed brick, well-loved second-hand furniture, a collection of mismatched coffee mugs in the break room, but it was home. More than that, it was sanctuary. Diane Kestrel, the senior partner, was the one who gave me my first real break after I miraculously passed the bar. She saw something in me during my interview, something that made her willing to take a chance on a woman with no connections and a resume that casually listed lived in car as a rather unconventional gap year experience. I'd been there for 2 years, diving headfirst into cases bigger firms wouldn't touch. Tenant rights, workers' compensation, disability claims. It wasn't the kind of law that made you rich, but it was the kind that genuinely helped people who desperately needed it. Diane always said we were in the business of leveling playing fields, and I believed her with every fiber of my being. This job had given me purpose, showed me that everything I'd suffered through had been worth it, if I could use it to help others. When I walked into the office, Diane was waiting in the conference room. She just waved me over, but I could already tell from her expression that word had traveled fast. Legal circles, as it turns out, are surprisingly small. You did good work today, Anna, she said, a warm, genuine smile on her face as I sat down. Claire called me right after court. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her, but she wanted me to know what you did for her. I just presented the facts, I mumbled, deflecting. No, Diane said, shaking her head. You gave her hope. You showed her that the system can work, that people like her don't have to just accept being trampled on. That's not nothing, Anna. I felt my throat tighten, gratitude welling up. Thank you. But then her expression turned serious. We need to talk about something else. Your parents. They're not going to let this go, are they? No, I admitted, the relief instantly replaced by a cold dread. They're absolutely not. Do you think they'll retaliate? I know they will. I thought about the raw fury and humiliation I'd seen in my mother's eyes. They'll try to discredit me, try to ruin my reputation. They have money, connections. They'll use both. Diane was quiet for a moment, her gaze steady. We'll deal with it when it comes. But Anna, you need to be prepared. People like your parents, when they feel cornered, they can be dangerous. Not physically necessarily, but they'll go after everything you've built. I know, I said, my voice firm despite the tremor I felt deep inside. But I couldn't just stand by and watch them hurt people. Not anymore. I understand, Diane said, a soft smile returning. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. What you did today took real courage. Later that evening my phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. Mom and Dad are furious. They're talking about suing you. Please be careful. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Of course they were furious. Of course they wanted revenge. That's just who they were. People who couldn't tolerate being challenged, who would sooner destroy someone than admit they were wrong. But I'd faced worse than their anger. I'd survived homelessness, soul-crushing poverty, and years of their relentless emotional abuse. Whatever they threw at me now, I could handle it. At least that's what I desperately told myself. As I packed up my briefcase to leave, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some primal instinct made me answer. Anna Thompson? A man's voice, deep and unfamiliar, asked. Yes, this is Anna. Who is this? My name is Henry Bradford. I was your grandfather's attorney. I need to speak with you about something urgent. Something your parents don't know about. My heart kicked into overdrive, a frantic drum in my chest. Grandfather's attorney? My grandfather had died 12 years ago. His estate was settled, distributed ages ago. What is it? I practically demanded, my voice tight. Not over the phone, I'm afraid. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? 9 a.m. at my office. Yes, I said instantly. I'll be there. He gave me the address, then hung up. I stood there holding my phone, my mind spinning a mile a minute. What could my grandfather's attorney possibly want after all these years? What could be so urgent that my parents couldn't know? A cold premonition snaked through me. I had a feeling I was about to find out, and something told me deep in my gut that this was going to change everything. Henry Bradford's office was nestled in an imposing old building downtown, the kind with cool marble floors and gleaming brass fixtures that felt like they'd been there since the roaring 20s. I arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, my stomach a knot of nervous anticipation. The receptionist, a kindly woman, led me to a corner office. Henry sat behind a massive oak desk, surrounded by towering file cabinets, and the dignified scent of old leather-bound law books. He was in his 70s, with a shock of white hair and incredibly kind eyes peering out from behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stood as I entered, extending a warm hand. Anna, thank you for coming on such short notice. You said it was urgent, I managed, shaking his hand, my voice still a little tight. What's this about? He gestured for me to sit, then pulled a thick, aged folder from his desk drawer. I've been your grandfather's attorney for 40 years. When he died, I handled his estate according to his wishes. But there was one provision in his will that was kept completely sealed. A provision that could only be opened under very specific conditions. My pulse quickened. What kind of provision? Your grandfather loved you very much, Anna, Henry said softly, his gaze gentle. He saw how your parents treated you. It broke his heart. So he made arrangements to protect you. He opened the folder and slid a single document across the polished wood. He established a trust fund in your name. $50,000 to be released when you turn 30, or when you obtained a professional degree, whichever came first. I stared at the number, utterly speechless. $50,000. It was more money than I'd ever had in my entire life, more than I'd ever even dreamed of having. You passed the bar exam 2 years ago, Henry continued, a slight smile touching his lips. That met the conditions. The money has been sitting in trust, accumulating interest. It's now worth nearly $60,000. Why didn't you tell me sooner? The words were barely a whisper, a choked sound. Your grandfather's instructions were explicit. The trust was to remain completely confidential until you met those conditions. He didn't want your parents to know about it. Didn't want them to interfere, or try to claim it for themselves. He knew them too well, Anna. Knew them far too well. I thought about my grandfather then. He was the quiet one, the only one who ever offered a kind word, a gentle smile, when my parents only offered scorn. He was the only one who truly believed I could be something more than the failure they constantly painted me as. There's something else, Henry said, his voice softer now, pulling a sealed envelope from the folder. Your grandfather wrote you a letter. He asked me to give it to you when the time came. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper, covered in Grandpa's careful, familiar handwriting. Dear Anna, if you're reading this, then you've done what I always knew you could do. You've made something of yourself despite everything they've thrown at you. I'm so incredibly proud of you. Even though I won't be there to tell you in person, I know your parents have made your life difficult. I've watched them favor your sister, watched them tear you down whenever you tried to rise. It broke my heart, but I couldn't change them. All I could do was try to give you a foundation to build on. This money isn't a solution to all your problems, but it's a start. Use it wisely. Build the life you deserve. And remember, you are worth more than they will ever understand. There's one more thing I need you to know. I was planning to change my will completely. To leave you half of everything, half the properties, half my savings. You deserved it more than they did. But I ran out of time. Be careful, Anna. Your parents are not good people. They care more about money than anything else, even family. Don't let them destroy you. You're stronger than they are. Love always. Grandpa. Tears streamed down my face, hot and stinging. Half of everything. He had wanted to give me millions. He'd been planning to change his will, to make sure I was truly taken care of, to protect me. But he died before he could. There's something else you should know, Henry said gently, his voice pulling me back to the present. The week before your grandfather died, your mother came to see me. She was asking very pointed questions about his will, about whether he'd made any recent changes. A cold, icy chill ran down my spine. You think she knew he was planning to change the will? I can't say for certain, Henry replied, his face unreadable, but the timing was suspicious. Your grandfather was in perfect health 1 week. The next week he was dead. Heart failure, they said. But he just had a physical exam, and his doctor told him he had the heart of a man 20 years younger. What are you saying? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Henry leaned back in his chair, choosing his words with immense care. I'm saying that when someone stands to lose a significant inheritance, they might do things they wouldn't otherwise do. I'm saying that your grandfather's death was very convenient for your parents. And I'm saying that if you look closely at the circumstances, you might find some questions that were never properly answered. My mind was absolutely reeling. Was he suggesting murder? That my parents, my own parents, had something to do with my grandfather's death? I have no proof, Henry continued, as if reading my thoughts. Just an old lawyer's suspicions. But I thought you should know, especially now that you've gone up against them in court. They've shown you what they're capable of when their money is threatened. Imagine what they might do if the stakes were even higher. I left Henry's office in a daze, clutching the thick folder containing the trust documents and my grandfather's precious letter. $60,000. It was enough to pay off the student loans I was still chipping away at. Enough to build a real emergency fund. Enough finally to breathe. But all I could hear, echoing in my head, were Henry's chilling words. Your grandfather's death was very convenient for your parents. I drove straight to the public library and spent the next 3 hours buried in old newspaper archives. I found Grandpa's obituary, brief and respectful, Died peacefully at home, surrounded by family. But then my eyes landed on a smaller article a week later. A letter to the editor from my grandfather's longtime physician, Dr. Russell Hayes. He expressed his shock at the sudden death of a patient he just examined and declared perfectly healthy. I found Dr. Hayes's contact information. He'd retired 5 years ago, but the receptionist gave me his home number. I called. He answered on the third ring. Dr. Hayes, my name is Anna Thompson. I'm calling about my grandfather, James Thompson. You were his doctor. A long pause. James Thompson. Yes, I remember him. A good man. His death was such a shock. Can I ask you something? I pressed, my voice barely steady. You wrote a letter to the newspaper, saying you were surprised by his death. Why? Another pause, even longer this time. Are you asking as his granddaughter, or in some other capacity? I'm an attorney, I clarified, my heart pounding. And I have reason to believe there might have been something suspicious about his death. Meet me at Elmwood Park in an hour, Dr. Hayes said, his voice low, urgent. There's something you need to know. Dr. Hayes was sitting on a park bench by the pond when I arrived, scattering breadcrumbs to a cluster of eager ducks. He was in his 80s now, with stooped shoulders and liver-spotted hands, but his eyes, when he finally turned them to me, were sharp and painfully alert. Thank you for meeting me, I said, sitting beside him. He didn't look at me directly, just kept tossing breadcrumbs. I've carried this guilt for 12 years, Anna. Maybe it's time to let it go. What guilt? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Your grandfather came to see me 2 days before he died. He was concerned about some strange symptoms. Nausea, dizziness, tingling in his extremities. I ran some tests, but the results wouldn't be back for a week. I told him it was probably nothing, maybe a virus. I sent him home. What were the test results? I pressed, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. They showed elevated levels of digoxin in his blood. Digoxin is a heart medication, but your grandfather wasn't taking any heart medication. The levels were high enough to cause arrhythmia, high enough to cause heart failure, high enough to kill someone. My breath caught in my throat. You're saying he was poisoned? I'm saying that someone gave him digoxin, probably in his food or drink, over several days. By the time the test results came back, he was already dead. I went to the police, but they said there wasn't enough evidence to open an investigation. The medical examiner ruled it natural causes. Heart failure. They said the digoxin in his system could have been a false positive or residue from some other medication. Without an autopsy showing clear poisoning, they wouldn't pursue it. Why didn't you push harder? The question tore from me, raw and desperate. Dr. Hayes finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw deep, agonizing shame. Your father came to see me. He said the family wanted to remember James peacefully, without the trauma of an investigation. He said it would destroy your grandmother to think someone had hurt him, and he offered me money, a lot of money, to let it go, to accept the medical examiner's ruling and move on. You took the money, I stated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. To my eternal shame, yes. I was 3 years from retirement, and my wife had just been diagnosed with cancer. We needed the money for her treatment. So, I told myself it was probably nothing, that I was seeing conspiracies where there were none. I let them bury your grandfather without answers. I felt sick. A profound, nauseating sickness. My father had bribed Dr. Hayes to stay silent about evidence of poisoning, which meant he knew exactly what had killed my grandfather, which meant he'd either done it himself or, at the very least, helped cover it up. Dr. Hayes, I said, my voice shaking with a strange mix of horror and grim determination. Would you be willing to testify to this? To put it in a sworn statement? He nodded slowly, his eyes clear and resolute now. Yes. I'm old now, and my wife passed away 5 years ago. I don't need their blood money anymore. And I don't want to die carrying this secret. If you're going after them, Anna, I'll help you. I got Dr. Hayes' statement recorded and notarized that same afternoon, then went straight to the district attorney's office. Catherine Morris, the sharp, formidable listened to every single word I said, her expression growing graver by the second. She studied the documents, read Dr. Hayes' sworn statement, then leaned back in her chair, a deep furrow between her brows. This is serious, Anna, she said, her voice somber. If what you're saying is true, we're looking at murder. But it's been 12 years. Physical evidence will be long gone. We'd need more than just elevated digoxin levels and a doctor's suspicions. What about motive? I interjected, my mind already racing. My grandfather was about to change his will. My parents stood to lose millions if he did. Henry Bradford, his attorney, can testify that my mother was asking questions about the will right before he died. That's circumstantial, Catherine countered, shaking her head. We need something concrete. Bank records showing they were in serious financial trouble. Proof they purchased digoxin. Witnesses who saw them administering it. Something more. I left the DA's office feeling a heavy wave of frustration. I had enough to raise strong suspicions, but not enough to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt. My parents, it seemed, had covered their tracks meticulously. But then a thought sparked in my mind. A vivid memory from childhood. When I was younger, before everything fell apart, my mother kept meticulous records of everything. Every receipt, every bill, every transaction. She was obsessed with documentation, with having proof. And if she was that obsessive 12 years ago, I pulled out my phone and called Melissa. We hadn't spoken since the courthouse, and I wasn't even sure she'd answer. But she did on the fourth ring. "Anna," she said quietly, her voice tentative. "Melissa, I need your help with something." "I can't. Mom and Dad are furious about the court case. They've forbidden me to talk to you." "Melissa," I said, cutting straight to the chase, my voice low and urgent, "I think they killed Grandpa." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence on the other end. Then a whispered, "What?" I told her everything. The trust fund. Henry's chilling suspicions. Dr. Hayes' statement about the digoxin poisoning. I laid out my grandfather's plans to change his will, my mother's suspicious visit to Henry's office, the bribe to Dr. Hayes. "That's impossible," Melissa finally blurted, but her voice wavered, thin and shaky. "They wouldn't. They couldn't. They put a child's health at risk to save money on repairs, Melissa." I reminded her, my voice hard. "They threw me out onto the street when I was 19. They sued me for emotional distress when I dared to stand up to them. What makes you think they're above murder?" "But Grandpa, he was their father." "He was also worth $2 million, I said grimly, "and they were about to lose half of it." Melissa was quiet for a long, agonizing moment. Then her voice barely a whisper. "What do you need from me? Mom keeps records, right? Financial documents, receipts, everything. Does she still have files from 12 years ago?" "Yes," she mumbled. "She keeps everything in the storage room in the basement. It's all organized by year. I need you to look for anything from the months leading up to Grandpa's death," I explained, my heart hammering. "Bank statements, credit card bills, pharmacy receipts. Anything that might show they were in financial trouble. Or that they purchased digoxin." "Anna, I can't just go through their private files." "Yes, you can," I insisted, my voice unwavering. "Because if I'm right, Melissa, they murdered our grandfather for money. And they've spent the last 12 years living off that blood money, letting everyone think he died naturally. Don't you want to know the truth?" Another long, agonizing silence. Then a hesitant, "I'll look. But Anna, if I find something, if this is real, what happens to them?" "They go to prison," I said simply, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. "For the rest of their lives." "And what happens to me?" she asked, her voice cracking. I didn't have an answer for that. Because if my parents went to prison for murder, Melissa would be left utterly alone. The golden child, the favorite, the one they'd spent their lives protecting and spoiling. She'd have nothing. No family, no support, no illusions left about who her parents really were. "I'm sorry," I said finally, the guilt a sharp pang. "But the truth matters more than comfort." "I'll call you tomorrow," Melissa said, and hung up. I sat in my car outside the DA's office, staring at my phone. I had just asked my sister to betray our parents, to help me send them to prison. A part of me felt a cold, sharp guilt. But a larger part felt nothing but a glacial, unwavering determination. Because if they truly killed my grandfather, they deserved whatever happened to them. The next 24 hours stretched into an eternity. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work. My mind was a whirlwind of what-ifs. What if Melissa found proof? What if she found nothing? What if she changed her mind and worse, told our parents what I was doing? But then the next evening my phone rang. It was Melissa. "I found something," she said, her voice shaking, raw with a terror I'd never heard from her before. "Anna, I found something bad." We met at a quiet coffee shop on the very edge of town. A place far from anywhere our parents might ever venture. Melissa looked utterly terrible, pale, hollow-eyed, as if she hadn't slept in days either. She sat across from me and with trembling hands, slid a folder across the table. "I went through everything," she choked out. "Bank statements, credit card bills, all of it. And I found these." I opened the folder. Inside were copies of credit card statements from the 3 months before my grandfather died. There were charges to pharmacies, medical supply companies, and online retailers. Melissa had highlighted several entries in glaring yellow. "This one," she pointed, her finger shaking, to a charge from an online pharmacy, "is for Digitalis purpurea seeds. That's foxglove. It contains digoxin naturally. You can extract it if you know how." My heart pounded against my ribs. They bought the poison. "That's not all." She pulled out more papers. "Look at these bank statements. 2 months before Grandpa died. Their checking account was overdrawn by $30,000. They had maxed out 3 credit cards. They were drowning in debt." I stared at the numbers, stark and undeniable. My parents, the picture of respectability, had been teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. They'd made terrible investments, overspent, dug themselves into an impossible financial hole. And then with such chilling convenience my grandfather died. And they inherited everything. "There's more," Melissa whispered, her voice barely audible. She pulled out a small, unassuming notebook. I found this hidden in Mom's desk drawer. It's her handwriting. I opened the notebook. The first few pages were ordinary. Grocery lists, appointment reminders. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then I turned a page and found an entry dated 3 weeks before my grandfather's death. Jay says he's changing the will. Giving half to Anna. Can't let that happen. We'll lose everything. Need to act fast. My hand shook so violently I could barely turn the page. Research shows digoxin hard to detect. Natural compound could look like heart failure. Jay takes tea every morning. Easy to add to tea. The next entries were meticulous. Dosage calculations, chilling research notes about how much digoxin would be needed to cause heart failure without being immediately obvious. The final entry was dated the day after my grandfather died. It's done. Doctor said heart failure. No one suspects. We're safe. Properties are ours. I looked up at Melissa. She was crying silently, tears streaming down her pale face, her body trembling. She killed him. Melissa whispered, the words raw, heartbroken. Mom killed Grandpa. She planned it. She researched it. She did it. And Dad must have known. He helped cover it up. I carefully photographed every single page with my phone, my hands still shaking. Then I looked at Melissa. Are you willing to testify to where you found these? To confirm this is your mother's handwriting. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I have to. I can't protect them anymore. Not after this. Grandpa was good to us. He loved us. And they killed him for money. Melissa, I warned, my voice softening. Once we take this to the police, there's no going back. They'll be arrested. They'll go to trial. Everything will come out. I know. Her voice was small but steady, resolute. But it's the right thing to do. You taught me that, Anna. In the courtroom when you stood up for Claire. You showed me what it means to do the right thing. Even when it's hard. Even when it costs you something. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Thank you. I know this isn't easy. Nothing about this is easy, she agreed, a tear escaping. But Grandpa deserves justice. And you deserved better than what they did to you. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. We went to the police station together, the folder clutched between us. Catherine Morris, the DA, was called in, even though it was well after hours. We laid out everything. The trust fund documents, Dr. Hayes's damning statement, the financial records revealing their desperate debt, and finally Mom's chilling notebook. Catherine's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. This is enough, she finally said, her voice tight with grim satisfaction. Finally, we can get a warrant. We'll arrest them tonight. Tonight. Melissa's voice cracked, a fresh wave of terror washing over her. The longer we wait, the more chance they have to destroy evidence or flee, Catherine explained, her gaze firm. If they realize what's happening, they might run. We need to move fast. 2 hours later, I sat in Catherine's office, watching through a monitor as police officers arrived at my parents' sprawling house. Melissa sat beside me, gripping my hand so tightly it hurt, her knuckles white. We watched our mother answer the door in her expensive robe, watched her face change in sickening slow motion, from bewildered confusion to absolute horror as the officers read her rights. We watched our father try to bluster and bully his way out of it, watched him ultimately be handcuffed and led to a patrol car, his head bowed in shame. It's real, Melissa whispered, tears streaming silently down her face. It's really happening. I felt numb, utterly, completely numb. All those years of being told I was worthless, of being thrown away like garbage, it all came from people who were capable of murder. People who had killed a kind old man, their own father, because he wanted to make sure I, the disappointment, was taken care of. The arraignment was scheduled for the very next morning. Catherine had enough evidence for charges of first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and fraud. Bail was set at a staggering $2 million, the exact amount they'd received from my grandfather's life insurance policy. They couldn't pay it. They'd already blown most of the money, and their remaining assets were frozen, pending investigation. My parents, the respectable Thompsons, would sit in jail awaiting trial. The news spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, every local station was covering the story. Prominent landlords arrested for murder. Woman discovers parents killed grandfather. 12-year-old murder case reopened. My face was everywhere, as was Melissa's. The press, with its insatiable hunger for drama, painted me as the heroic daughter who'd uncovered the horrific truth, and my parents as the monsters who'd literally gotten away with murder for over a decade. My firm was deluged with calls. Some were from former tenants of my parents, eager to share their own stories of abuse and negligence. Others were from attorneys offering support. A few were from news outlets desperate for interviews. But one call, 3 days after the arrests, truly stood out. It was from Claire's lawyer, the tenant I defended in court. Anna, you need to know something, the lawyer began. After your parents were arrested, 3 other tenants came forward, all with similar stories. Unsafe conditions, threats, intimidation. But one of them, a man named Thomas, said your father threatened him last year. Told him if he didn't drop his complaints about a broken furnace, He'd end up like your grandfather. My blood ran cold. Thomas thought it was just a figure of speech, the lawyer continued. But now it sounds like a confession. Exactly, I finished, the implication hitting me like a physical blow. He's practically admitted to murder. Thomas is willing to testify, the lawyer said. This could strengthen the prosecution's case even more. I thanked him and hung up, my hand shaking. My father, with such chilling arrogance, had used my grandfather's death as a threat. The absolute certainty that they'd gotten away with it, that they would never be caught. It made me sick to my stomach. That evening Melissa and I met at my apartment. She'd moved out of our parents' house, crashing with a friend while trying to figure out her next steps. She looked utterly lost, fragile and broken. But beneath the surface, there was something new in her eyes. A raw, painful clarity she'd never possessed before. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, she confessed, her voice thick with regret. Or maybe just didn't want to see. The way they talked about Grandpa after he died, like they were more relieved than sad. The way they spent money so freely right after the inheritance came through. How they always discouraged me from asking questions about his death. You were young, Melissa, I said gently, reaching for her hand. And they were your parents. You trusted them. I shouldn't have, she choked out, tears welling up again. I should have questioned things. Should have stood up for you when they kicked you out. Should have done a lot of things differently. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Can you forgive me? There's nothing to forgive, I said, holding her hand tightly. You were caught in their web too, just in a different way. They manipulated you, used you, but you broke free. That's what matters. She nodded, wiping her eyes. What happens now? Now we wait for trial, I told her, my voice resolute. We testify. We make sure they never hurt anyone else again. And after that? I let my mind wander to that daunting question. After the trial, after justice was served, what would be left? Melissa and I would have each other, that was certain. But we'd never have a family in the way other people did. Never have parents we could trust. Holidays without ghosts. A past we could look back on without flinching. But maybe that was okay. Maybe we could build something new, something better. Maybe we could be the family we'd never truly had. After that, I said, meeting her gaze, we figure out how to move forward. Together. Melissa smiled, a fragile but genuine curve of her lips. Together, she repeated, a new kind of hope shining in her eyes. Outside my apartment window, the sun was setting over Omaha, painting the sky in fiery hues. Tomorrow would bring more headlines, more questions, more pain to process. But tonight, sitting with my sister, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like maybe finally things were going to be okay. The trial began 6 months later, in a courtroom packed to the rafters with reporters, former tenants, and curious onlookers. I sat in the front row with Melissa, both of us dressed in dark, conservative suits. Across the aisle, my parents sat with their attorney, a desperate-looking man named Frank, who'd clearly taken their case because no one else would touch it. My mother looked nothing like the polished, imperious woman who'd walked into the courthouse just 6 months prior. Her hair had gone completely gray. Her expensive clothes replaced by a stark orange jumpsuit. She'd aged a decade in jail. My father sat hunched beside her, defeated, utterly broken before the trial had even truly begun. Judge Holbrook presided, the same judge who had ruled so decisively in Claire's favor. When she saw me, she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. I nodded back, a silent understanding passing between us. The prosecution's case was nothing short of devastating. Catherine Morris, relentless and precise, laid out the evidence piece by painstaking piece, building an undeniable narrative of raw greed, cold-blooded premeditation, and calculated murder. She presented the financial records, starkly revealing my parents' desperate, near-bankrupt situation. Then she held up the notebook, my mother's own handwriting, her chilling research into digoxin, her cold, methodical calculations of dosages and methods. The courtroom held its breath. Dr. Hayes took the stand. His voice, old and trembling, confessed to finding the elevated digoxin levels, and to my father's bribe, his desperate plea to keep him quiet. He admitted his complicity, tearfully apologizing for staying silent for so long. I saw several jurors discreetly wipe their eyes as he spoke, his remorse palpable. Henry Bradford, my grandfather's attorney, followed. He testified about my mother's suspicious visit, her probing questions regarding the will, just days before Grandpa's death. He then explained how my grandfather had planned to change everything to give me half his estate to ensure I was protected. Henry read my grandfather's final wishes aloud, and my throat tightened, a wave of bittersweet emotion washing over me as I heard those words again. Finally, Thomas, the former tenant, took the stand. He recounted my father's chilling threat, delivered with such casual cruelty. If I didn't shut up about the furnace, I'd end up like his father-in-law. Thomas had dismissed it then, he admitted, as mere bluster. Now, he concluded, his voice trembling, now I know he was confessing. Then it was Melissa's turn. She walked to the stand, her head held high, a fragile but undeniable strength in her posture. She looked directly at our parents, who sat rigid, their faces grim, as she swore to tell the truth. "Please describe what you found in your mother's desk," Catherine asked gently. Melissa's voice was steady, clear. "I found a notebook in her handwriting. It detailed plans to poison my grandfather with digoxin, extracted from foxglove seeds. It included dosage calculations and notes about how to administer it without detection. The final entry stated that it was done, that he died as planned, and that they were safe." My mother's attorney scrambled, trying to object, claiming the notebook could have been planted or forged. But handwriting experts had already confirmed it was undeniably my mother's. There was no disputing it. "Why did you come forward with this evidence?" Catherine asked. Melissa looked at me, then back at the jury, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Because my grandfather was a good man who loved us. He didn't deserve to die for money. And my sister didn't deserve to be thrown away like garbage because our parents were greedy. The truth matters more than protecting people who don't deserve protection." My mother, across the aisle, started to cry, then loud theatrical sobs, but not a single person in that courtroom, not even the sternest juror, showed an ounce of sympathy. Their faces were stone. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand feeling strangely calm, almost detached. I'd been preparing for this moment for months, perhaps even years, without knowing it. But now that it was here, I felt like I was watching myself from a distance, recounting a story that was both mine and somehow separate. Catherine asked me to describe my relationship with my parents, and I told the truth. All of it. The glaring favoritism, the relentless emotional abuse, the devastating day they threw me out, the years of homelessness and brutal struggle, the insidious ways they tried to destroy my budding career when I dared to stand up to them. "Why do you think they treated you this way?" Catherine asked, her voice quiet. "Because I represented something they couldn't control," I said, my voice strong. "Because my grandfather loved me, and they couldn't stand that. Because if they acknowledged my worth, they'd have to confront their own cruelty. It was easier for them to pretend I was worthless than to admit they had failed, utterly, as parents." My mother's attorney, desperate now, launched into a cross-examination, trying to paint me as vindictive, a bitter daughter with an axe to grind. "Isn't it true that you've hated your parents for years? That you've wanted revenge ever since they kicked you out?" "I didn't hate them," I corrected him, my gaze unwavering. "I was hurt. There's a difference. And I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. For their tenant, for my grandfather, for all the people they'd hurt. If that happened to bring consequences down on them, that's because of their choices, not mine." "But you benefit from this, don't you?" he pressed, circling. "If they're convicted, you inherit everything." "I don't want their money," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I never did. I built my own life without them. The inheritance can go to their victims, the tenants they abused, the people they hurt. I just want them held accountable. The prosecution rested its case, a mountain of undeniable evidence. Frank, my parents' attorney, made a half-hearted attempt at a defense. He paraded character witnesses, people who swore my parents were upstanding citizens, generous charity donors, pillars of the community. But it all rang hollow, a flimsy veil against the brutal truth that had emerged. When my mother took the stand in her own defense, she claimed the chilling notebook was just dark fiction, notes for a crime novel she'd been writing. No one, absolutely no one, believed her. The trial lasted 3 agonizing weeks. When closing arguments finally arrived, Catherine Morris stood before the jury, her voice clear and cutting. "They murdered a kind man in cold blood for money. They poisoned him slowly, watched him suffer, and felt no remorse. They've spent 12 years living off blood money while his granddaughter slept in her car. Justice demands a verdict of guilty." The jury deliberated for a mere 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood. "On the count of first-degree murder, how do you find?" "Guilty." My mother collapsed, a grotesque, wailing mess. My father sat motionless, staring at nothing, his world crumbling. "On the count of evidence tampering, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of fraud, how do you find?" "Guilty." Judge Holbrook set sentencing for 2 weeks later. As the bailiffs led my parents away, my mother turned, her eyes locking onto mine. There was nothing but pure, undiluted hate in her gaze. I looked back and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just emptiness. Sentencing day arrived, cold and gray, mirroring the somber mood that hung heavy in the courtroom. Judge Holbrook looked down at my parents, her expression one of profound, weary disappointment. "I've been on the bench for 27 years, she began, her voice resonating with authority. "I've seen every kind of crime, every kind of criminal, but what you did stands out for its sheer callousness. You murdered your own father, your children's grandfather, for money. You calculated the dosage, administered the poison, and watched him die. And then you spent 12 years living comfortably off his estate while your daughter, the one he wanted to protect, struggled to survive, even slept in her car." My mother tried to speak, but Judge Holbrook held up a hand, silencing her. "You had every advantage, money, education, opportunity, and you used all of it to hurt people. Your tenants lived in squalor while you collected exorbitant rent. Your daughter was thrown out to fend for herself, completely abandoned. And your father, a good man by all accounts, was murdered in his own home. She paused, her gaze unwavering. The law requires me to sentence you, but I can tell you that no sentence will ever be enough for what you've done. She looked at the papers in front of her. On the count of first-degree murder, I sentence you each to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On the counts of evidence tampering and fraud, I sentence you each to an additional 15 years, to run consecutively. You will spend the rest of your lives behind bars, and that is far less than you deserve. The gavel came down with chilling finality. My mother screamed, a sound of pure visceral anguish that echoed through the stunned courtroom. My father sat silent, tears streaming unheeded down his face. As they were led away, my mother turned to me one last time, her eyes blazing. I hope you're satisfied, she spat, the venom unmistakable. You've destroyed this family. No, I said clearly, standing up so she couldn't miss a single word. You destroyed this family when you chose money over people. When you chose greed over love. I just made sure everyone knew the truth. She was dragged away, still screaming, as the courtroom erupted in a cacophony of shouts. Reporters clamored. Former tenants cheered. Melissa grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight, a silent affirmation between us. Outside the courthouse, Catherine Morris held a press conference, the media frenzy palpable. Today justice was served for James Thompson, she declared, her voice firm. And for all the victims of Helen and Robert Thompson's insatiable greed. This case demonstrates that no one is above the law, that wealth and status cannot protect you when you commit such heinous crimes. I want to especially commend Anna Thompson and Melissa Thompson for their incredible courage in coming forward for choosing truth over a twisted sense of family loyalty. Reporters swarmed me, microphones shoved into my face. How do you feel seeing your parents sentenced to life? Relieved, I said honestly, the word heavy with a complex mix of emotions. Not happy, not triumphant, just relieved that they can't hurt anyone else. Will you accept the inheritance? No, I stated, my voice clear and firm. Everything they have will go to a fund for their former tenants, the people they actually hurt and exploited. That's what my grandfather would have wanted. What's next for you? Another reporter pressed. I thought about it, looking out at the city that had witnessed so much of my struggle. I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing. Helping people who need legal representation but can't afford it. Making sure landlords are held accountable. Trying to make the system work for the people who usually get trampled by it. That night, Melissa and I went to my grandfather's grave. We hadn't been there together since his funeral 12 long years ago. The headstone was simple. James Thompson, beloved father and grandfather. 1940 to 2013. We got them, Grandpa, Melissa whispered softly, kneeling by the cold stone. They're going to pay for what they did to you. I knelt beside her. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry you didn't get to see me become an attorney. Didn't get to see me prove them wrong. A tear traced a path down my cheek. But I hope you know I never forgot what you told me. That I was worth more than they said. You were right. We sat there for a while in a silence that was finally peacefully shared. The cold wind rustled through the bare trees, a mournful song. Finally Melissa spoke, her voice still quiet but thoughtful. What happens to us now? We're orphans in a way. No parents, no family except each other. We built something new, I said, looking at her. A profound sense of shared destiny settling over me. Something better. We become the family we never had. I'd like that, she said, a real fragile smile gracing her lips this time. You know, I've been thinking about going back to school. Maybe becoming a paralegal. Working with you at the firm. Diane would love that, I said, a genuine smile breaking through my own weariness. We're always short-staffed. It's strange, Melissa mused, looking out at the fading light. I spent my whole life trying to be what they wanted. The perfect daughter, the obedient one. And it was all for nothing. They didn't really love me, Anna. They just loved that I was easy to control. They were incapable of real love, I confirmed, the harsh truth no longer cutting, just is. That was their failing, not yours and not mine. We deserved better parents. Grandpa knew that. We left a bouquet of violets on the grave, his favorite. As we walked back to the car, I felt something shift deep inside me. The fiery anger that had driven me for so long. The burning need for vindication. The desperate desire to prove myself worthy. It was fading. Not entirely gone, but quieter now. Manageable. As we drove away, Melissa turned to me, a small weary smile on her face. Anna, she said, thank you for not giving up. For fighting. For showing me what courage really looks like. You showed courage too, I replied, squeezing her hand. Coming forward with that evidence, testifying against them. That took a strength I'm not sure I would have had in your position. We were both strong, she corrected softly. Just in different ways. But we're stronger together. I smiled. Yeah, we are. The road ahead was long, incredibly long. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't facing it alone. And that truly made all the difference. 3 months after the sentencing, I stood in the conference room at Kestrel and Associates, looking out at the faces of 23 former tenants of my parents' properties. They'd all come at my invitation to learn about the restitution fund we'd established. The court has ordered the liquidation of all assets belonging to Helen and Robert Thompson, I explained, my voice echoing in the quiet room. The 3 rental properties have been sold, personal assets, investments, everything. After legal fees and court costs, there's approximately $1.8 million remaining. That money will be divided among all verified victims' tenants who suffered due to unsafe living conditions, people who paid medical bills because of their negligence, anyone who was harmed by their actions. Claire, the woman whose case had started this entire seismic shift, raised her hand. How much will each person get? It depends on the severity of harm and documentation of damages, I clarified. But we estimate between $30,000 and $70,000 per person. Some will get more if they can prove significant medical expenses or ongoing health issues. A man in the back stood up. That money should go to you, Anna. You're the one who brought them down. You sacrificed everything to get justice. I shook my head, my gaze firm. I didn't do this for money. I did it because it was right. This money belongs to the people they hurt. I have my grandfather's trust fund now. That's more than enough for me. The meeting continued for another hour, filled with powerful stories, tears, and hugs. These were people who had been victimized and silenced, who thought no one cared about their suffering. Now they were being heard. They were being compensated. They were finally being vindicated. After everyone left, Diane walked into the conference room. That was a good thing you did, Anna, she said, a proud smile on her face. A lot of lawyers would have taken a hefty portion as fees. I'm not interested in profiting from my parents' crimes, I replied. Besides, I have enough. The trust fund paid off my loans and gave me a cushion. I don't need more. Speaking of which, Diane said, her eyes twinkling, I have a proposition for you. I'm getting older, thinking about retirement in a few years. I'd like you to consider becoming a partner, eventually taking over the firm entirely. I stared at her, utterly stunned. Are you serious? Completely, she affirmed. You're the best attorney I've ever trained. You care about the clients. You fight like hell. And you understand what it's like to be powerless. This firm needs someone like that at the helm. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Diane chuckled. Think about it. We can discuss details later. That evening, Melissa and I met for dinner at a quiet downtown restaurant. She'd started classes at the community college, working towards her paralegal certificate. She looked healthier than I'd seen her in years, with a natural color in her cheeks and a new light in her eyes. How was your day? She asked, taking a sip of water. Surreal, I admitted. I distributed almost $2 million to people our parents victimized, and Diane offered to make me a partner in the firm. Melissa's eyes widened. That's incredible. Are you going to accept? I think so, I said, a soft warmth spreading through me. It feels right, you know? Like everything I went through, all the struggles led to this. Grandpa would be so proud, she said softly. You became exactly who he knew you could be. We ordered our food and talked about normal things for a while. Her classes, my cases, whether we should adopt a cat for my apartment. It felt strange and wonderful to have a truly normal conversation with my sister, to have a relationship not poisoned by our parents' manipulation and cruelty. I saw them last week, Melissa said suddenly, her voice dropping. At the prison. I set down my fork. Why would you do that? I needed closure, I guess. Needed to see them one more time. She took a shaky breath. Mom tried to guilt trip me. Said I'd betrayed the family. Dad just cried and said he was sorry. But neither of them actually took responsibility. Even now, even after everything, they can't admit they were wrong. Some people never do, I said, my voice gentle. They're too broken, too twisted by their own choices. But that's not your burden to carry anymore. I know. She smiled, a faint sad smile. I'm not going back. That was goodbye for good this time. We finished dinner and walked through downtown Omaha, past the old courthouse where this entire saga had begun. I thought about that day 6 months ago, walking into that courtroom expecting nothing, only to change everything. I thought about my mother's disgust, my father's dismissal, the judge's surprise when she recognized me. I thought about how far I'd come from the 19-year-old sleeping in her car, the girl they told would never amount to anything. Do you ever wish things had been different? Melissa asked, breaking the silence. That we'd had normal parents, a normal childhood? Sometimes, I admitted honestly. But then I think about who I became because of what I went through. The empathy I have for people who are struggling. The relentless drive to fight for justice. The deep understanding that systemic problems hurt real people. Would I have that if I'd grown up comfortable and privileged? I don't know. So, you're saying you're grateful for the trauma? Melissa raised an eyebrow, a flicker of her old wit returning. I laughed, a genuine hearty laugh. No. I'm saying I'm grateful for who I became in spite of it. There's a difference. We stopped at a coffee shop, the very same one where Melissa had first shown me the damning evidence of our grandfather's murder. So much had changed since that day. So much had been revealed, destroyed, rebuilt. I have something for you, Melissa said, pulling an envelope from her purse. I've been holding on to this. It's another letter from Grandpa. Henry Bradford gave it to me after the trial. He said Grandpa wanted you to have it when everything was settled. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Dear Anna, if you're reading this, then you've uncovered the truth about my death. I suspected your parents might try something. I saw the way they looked at my estate, the cold calculations in their eyes. That's why I made sure to leave evidence, to give you the tools to find justice if something happened to me. I'm so incredibly proud of you, not just for your accomplishments but for your character. You have a strength they'll never understand, a moral compass they lack entirely. Use it well. Help people who can't help themselves. Be the person I always knew you were. And remember, the best revenge is living well, building a life they said you couldn't have, becoming someone they said you could never be. You've already won, Anna. Everything else is just making sure they face consequences. You are loved. You are worthy. You are enough. Always. Grandpa, tears streamed down my face as I finished reading, a profound, aching love filling my chest. Melissa reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He knew. I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. He knew what they might do. And he still tried to protect me, even after death. He loved you, Melissa said, her own eyes glistening. Really loved you, the way parents should. I carefully folded the letter and put it in my pocket, right over my heart. I'm going to keep fighting, I said, my voice resolute. For people like Claire, like all those tenants, like everyone who gets trampled by people with power and money. That's how I'll honor him. And I'll help you, Melissa said, her smile bright through her tears. Once I get my certificate, I'll be right there with you. We'll be a team. A team. I smiled. I like that. My parents spent their remaining years in separate prisons. Their legacy a chilling testament to greed, murder, and cruelty. My mother died of a stroke 4 years into her sentence, bitter and unrepentant until the very end. My father lived longer, wasting away in the prison library, supposedly trying to understand where he'd gone wrong. But according to Melissa, who visited him once before his death, he never truly grasped it. He died believing he'd been unlucky, that he'd merely gotten caught rather than done something fundamentally wrong. Some people, I learned, are simply incapable of genuine remorse. The tenants they'd victimized used their restitution to rebuild their lives. Claire proudly sent her daughter to college. Thomas finally got the medical treatment he so desperately needed, and 3 other families were able to buy their first homes. Their suffering hadn't been erased, but at least it had been acknowledged and compensated. As for me, I became a partner at Kestrel & Associates, and eventually took over when Diane retired. Melissa worked diligently beside me, a brilliant paralegal who deeply understood our clients because she, too, had once felt utterly powerless. We built something good, something meaningful, from the ashes of our broken family. I never married, never had children of my own. My family became the people I helped, the justice I fought for, and the sister who'd found her courage when it mattered most. And sometimes, late at night in my office, I take out my grandfather's letters and remember that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be, and using that success to help others they would have crushed. I'd built a life from nothing, proved my worth without their approval, and ensured they faced consequences for their crimes. In the end, that was victory enough.